Glendale has always been a city of contrasts. In the business center, glass skyscrapers towered, reflecting the lights of millions of dollars that changed hands every day. On the outskirts, endless rows of identical houses stretched out, home to those who served this golden machine of wealth. Cornelia Wright knew this geography of inequality like the back of her hand. At 24, she had learned to read men like an open book. Every gesture, every glance, every intonation told her how much the person in front of her was worth and what she could get out of him. Sitting in an expensive beauty salon on Park Avenue, Cornelia studied her reflection in the mirror with the cold calculation of a surgeon. Victoria was what her clients called her. That name brought her $3,000 a night, sometimes more if the client was generous or particularly lonely. But Cornelia had no intention of playing this game her whole life. She had a plan as clear and ruthless as she was. "All done, sweetheart," the stylist said, stepping back to admire his work. Platinum curls framed Cornelia's chiseled features perfectly. She paid without looking at the bill. Money was just a tool, a means to an end. Stepping outside, she took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Tyler, it's me. I need to pick something up." It took 20 minutes by taxi to reach Empire, an elite club in the city center. Cornelia remembered the first time she had stepped into the club a year and a half ago. Back then, she was just Nell from the working-class neighborhood, a girl who waited tables to pay for college. Tyler Mills worked as a bartender and was the only person who treated her like a human being in a world where everything was measured in money. Their romance lasted 8 months. Tyler was a good guy, honest, caring, with plans for the future. He dreamed of opening his own bar, maybe getting married, having children. Cornelia allowed herself to believe in this fairy tale until she realized that honesty doesn't make millions. "Nell," Tyler came out from behind the bar when he saw her. His voice sounded like a mixture of joy and pain. "You look different." "I came for my things." Cornelia was cold, as always when it came to the past. "Do you still have them?" Tyler nodded silently and led her into the back room. In the corner stood a small box with her books, photographs, and a couple of sweaters, the remnants of the life she had left behind. "Nell, what's going on with you?" Tyler's voice sounded genuinely concerned. "People are saying strange things." "What people?" Cornelia looked up at him. There was no warmth or regret in her eyes. "You know who, the rich clients who come here after their meetings. They mention a girl named Victoria. The description sounds a lot like you." Cornelia smiled slowly. It was a smile that could freeze the blood. "So what? I finally understand how this world works, Tyler. There are those who take and those who give. I've decided to be in the first category." "That's not you, Nell. The girl I fell in love with." "That girl is gone," Cornelia interrupted him. "She was weak. She believed in love, in justice, in the fact that good triumphs over evil. A foolish, naive girl." Tyler tried to take her hand, but she pulled it away. "Nell, listen to me. Money won't make you happy. I've seen these people, these rich people. They come here and drink themselves into oblivion because their lives are empty. They have everything, but they're miserable." "But they're miserable in silk and diamonds," Cornelia replied, picking up the box. "And I'm tired of being unhappy in second-hand clothes." She headed for the exit, but Tyler called after her again. "What will happen when you meet someone stronger than you? Someone who plays this game better?" Cornelia turned around. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. "There's no such person." Leaving the club, she got into her new car, a red Maserati, a gift from one of her latest clients. Her next stop was the office of Stone Enterprises, a construction company in the heart of the business district. Cornelia had spent 2 weeks researching Frank Stone, 52 years old, married for 20 years, with an estimated net worth of $200 million. His construction empire spanned the entire state, but more importantly, he had a reputation for loving beautiful women and being generous with gifts. Entering the marble lobby of the skyscraper, Cornelia headed straight for the elevator. She knew that Frank worked late on Tuesdays. She had obtained this information from his secretary in exchange for a bottle of expensive wine and a couple of hours of friendly conversation. 31st floor. Frank Stone's office occupied the entire corner of the building. Panoramic windows offered a view of the entire Glendale. Cornelia knocked on the office door and entered without waiting for a response. Frank Stone looked up from his documents. He was a large man with graying temples and the confident bearing of a successful businessman. His suit cost more than many people earned in a year. "Excuse me, but who are you? How did you get in here?" "My name is Victoria," Cornelia said slowly, approaching his desk. "And I think we can find common ground." Frank leaned back in his chair, studying his uninvited guest. Cornelia knew she looked flawless. Her expensive dress accentuated her figure, and her makeup was applied with precision. "Listen, Miss Victoria, I don't know what you want, but I have a secretary who handles appointments." "Your secretary isn't here." Cornelia sat down on the edge of the table, placing her hand next to his documents. "And what I need cannot be discussed in front of strangers." At that moment, Frank realized who he was dealing with. He had seen women like this before, beautiful, dangerous, willing to do anything for money. But there was something special about Cornelia. The cold determination in her eyes, the calculation in her every movement. "How much?" he asked simply. "5,000 for the night," Cornelia replied. "But I have a special offer for you." Frank raised an eyebrow. "I'm not just a call girl, Mr. Stone. I'm an investment in your future. Beautiful, intelligent, willing to be whatever you want me to be. Wife, mistress, companion, anything you want. For the right price, of course." "And what do you want?" Cornelia stood up and walked over to the window, looking at the lights of the city below. "All of this," she said, gesturing toward the panorama. "I want to live here, up here. I want people to look up at me, not down at me." Frank was intrigued, despite all his misgivings. In the business world, he was used to people who wanted something, but they usually hid their intentions behind politeness and pretense. This woman was honest in her greed, and that fascinated him. "I have a wife," he said. "I know. Margaret Stone, 45 years old, owner of the Moonlight Gallery, a beautiful woman, but—" Cornelia turned to him. "When was the last time you saw fire in her eyes? When was the last time she looked at you as if you were the only man in the world?" Frank didn't answer, but Cornelia could see from his face that she had hit the mark. "Think about it, Mr. Stone. I'm in no hurry. I have time." She headed for the exit, but turned back at the door. "Oh, and one more thing. Just call me Cornelia. Victoria is for regular customers, and you're not a regular client, are you?" Left alone, Frank stared for a long time at the door through which this mysterious woman had left. At home, his wife was waiting for him, with whom he no longer spoke in the evenings, preferring silence at dinner. Margaret increasingly found solace in a bottle of wine, and he in his work. And now Cornelia had burst into his life, dangerous as a snake and beautiful as deadly poison. He knew he had to forget about this encounter, delete the phone number she had left on his desk. But he already knew he couldn't. In the mansion in the hills, Margaret Stone stood at her bedroom window, looking at the city lights. She was holding a glass of red wine, her third of the evening. Frank was late for work again, or at least that's what he said. 20 years of marriage had taught her to read between the lines. She knew about his fleeting infatuations, about the escort girls he sometimes hired in hotels. Margaret pretended not to notice. In their circle, such things were not discussed openly. Millionaires' wives were supposed to be blind, deaf, and mute when it came to their husbands' infidelities. But lately, something had changed. Frank had become more distracted, smiled more at his phone, and stayed at work even longer. And Margaret felt something dark and dangerous growing inside her. 3 days passed since that meeting in the office before Frank dialed Cornelia's number. He spent those 3 days trying to convince himself that he should forget about the mysterious blonde. But every time he looked at his wife at breakfast, reading the newspaper in complete silence, he remembered Cornelia's burning eyes and her words that she was ready to be whatever he wanted her to be. "Cornelia, this is Frank Stone." "I was waiting for your call," she said, her voice betraying neither surprise nor joy, only confidence. "Although I thought you would call earlier. Where can we meet?" "The Grand Glendale Hotel, the penthouse. I've already made a reservation." Frank was surprised by her foresight, but said nothing. Cornelia was clearly not the kind of woman who left anything to chance. The Grand Glendale Hotel was one of the most expensive in the city. When Frank went up to the penthouse, Cornelia was already waiting for him, standing by the panoramic window in a champagne-colored silk dress. She had a glass of wine in her hand, and candles were burning on the table. "Impressive," Frank said, looking around the room. "How much does this cost?" "3,000 a night," Cornelia replied without turning around. "But it's an investment. A man of your caliber deserves the right surroundings." She turned to him, and Frank felt his breath catch. By candlelight, Cornelia looked even more stunning, but there was still that cold, calculating gleam in her eyes. "Tell me about yourself," she said, pouring him some wine. "The real Frank Stone, not the one described in the magazines." Frank was surprised by her approach. Usually, the women he photographed weren't interested in his inner world. They did their job and left with their money. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How you became who you are, what drives you, what you're afraid of." They spent the next 2 hours talking. Cornelia turned out to be not only beautiful, but also an intelligent conversationalist. She asked the right questions, listened attentively, and responded sincerely. Frank told her things he had never shared even with his wife, about his ambitions, disappointments, and fears. "You know what's strange?" he said as they sat on the sofa. "I've built an empire. I have everything money can buy. But in recent years, I've felt like I'm in a cage." "What kind of cage?" Cornelia put her hand on his shoulder. "A cage of expectations. Everyone around me expects me to behave a certain way. My wife, my business partners, even my children. I have to be the perfect husband, the flawless businessman, the model father. Sometimes I feel like the real Frank Stone died somewhere along the road to success." Cornelia listened intently, taking mental notes. The loneliness of a rich man was something she could use. "What would the real Frank Stone do?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." He looked at her. "Probably taken a risk, done something crazy and unpredictable." "Like what?" Frank paused, then said, surprising himself, "Like fallen in love with a beautiful stranger who barged into his office uninvited." Cornelia smiled, not the cold smile she had shown before, but a warm and almost sincere one. "That's pretty crazy," she agreed. When they made love, Cornelia played her role perfectly. She was passionate but not vulgar, experienced but not cynical. Frank believed that she enjoyed being close to him, although for Cornelia it was just another role. Lying next to him in bed, she studied his relaxed face. Frank Stone turned out to be simpler than she had thought. Beneath the mask of a successful businessman was a lonely man who craved understanding and admiration. It was exactly what she needed. "Frank," she whispered, "I want to see you again." "When?" "Tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and every day after that." He turned to her. "Cornelia, I can't." "You can." She put her finger on his lips. "The question is, do you want to?" At that moment, Frank's phone rang. The name Margaret appeared on the screen. Cornelia saw his face change. "Don't answer," she said. "It's my wife." "I know who it is, but you're here with me right now. Isn't this moment worth protecting?" Frank looked at his phone, then at Cornelia, and hung up. Meanwhile, Margaret Stone sat in her moonlight gallery, staring at the dark screen of her phone. Frank hadn't answered his phone for 2 days straight. His secretary said he was out on an important meeting, but Margaret knew there were no meetings on his calendar for the evening. The gallery was her baby, the only thing that had brought her joy in recent years. Here, among the paintings and sculptures, she felt alive. But today, even art couldn't drown out the anxiety gnawing at her insides. "Mrs. Stone?" A young woman with a catalog in her hands entered the gallery. "I'm here about the contemporary art exhibition." Margaret looked up. Standing before her was a beautiful blonde woman in an expensive dress. Something about her seemed familiar to Margaret, but she couldn't quite place it. "Of course, please come in. My name is Margaret." "Victoria," the stranger introduced herself. "I'm a collector. I heard you have a magnificent collection of impressionists." They spent the next half hour discussing art. Cornelia, she introduced herself as Victoria, demonstrated an astonishing knowledge of painting. Margaret was impressed. "Where did you get such profound knowledge?" she asked. "I studied art history in college," Cornelia lied. In fact, she had gleaned all her knowledge from the internet and a few books while preparing for this meeting. But then life took a different turn. "I understand," Margaret nodded. "Not everyone gets to follow their dreams." Cornelia studied Frank's wife closely. Margaret was a beautiful woman, but fatigue and disappointment had left their mark on her face. In her eyes, Cornelia saw the same emptiness she had noticed in many of the wealthy women in Glendale. "Are you married?" Margaret asked. "No," Cornelia replied. "Not until I meet the right man." "The right man?" "You know, a man who is not only handsome and rich, but also available." Margaret felt a twinge in her chest. There was a hidden threat in the woman's words. "What do you mean by available?" Cornelia smiled her most innocent smile. "Free from obligations, not bound by marriage or other obstacles." After the mysterious visitor left, Margaret sat in the empty gallery for a long time. Something about the woman's behavior had alarmed her. Too many coincidences. The unexpected visit, the interest in art, the strange comments about marriage. She took out her phone and tried calling Frank again. Again, the answering machine. At that moment, Tyler Mills entered the gallery. Margaret knew him. He sometimes worked at private parties held at the gallery. "Mrs. Stone, sorry to bother you," he said. "I wanted to ask if you've seen a blonde woman here? A beautiful woman in an expensive dress?" Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "What do you want with her?" Tyler hesitated. "It's a personal matter. Her name is Cornelia Wright, but she may be using other names." "Victoria?" Margaret asked quietly. "Yes, that's one of her names. So she was here?" Margaret nodded, feeling panic rising inside her. "Who is she?" Tyler looked at her sympathetically. "She works in the escort business, a very expensive escort business." Margaret's world spun. Everything fell into place. Her husband's strange behavior, his constant absences, and now this woman's visit to the gallery. It wasn't a coincidence. "I'm sorry, I have to go," she said, grabbing her bag and heading for the exit. "Mrs. Stone," Tyler called after her. "Be careful. Cornelia is dangerous. She'll stop at nothing to get what she wants." That evening, Detective James Connor sat in his office at the Glendale Police Department headquarters, sorting through another stack of documents. His divorce from his wife had been finalized a week ago, and now work was the only thing that distracted him from thoughts of his broken family. On the table lay the investigation files for a series of burglaries in an upscale neighborhood. The thieves were professionals. They knew when the houses were empty, what to take, and how to bypass the alarms. Connor suspected that the criminals had an informant among the servants of the wealthy. The phone rang. "Detective Connor." "This is Sergeant Riley. We have a strange situation here. A woman called the station saying her husband was being threatened, but when we got there, she said she had changed her mind about filing a report." "Name?" "Margaret Stone. Address is 15 Hill Street." Connor knew that name. The Stones were one of the most influential families in Glendale. "What exactly did she say?" "That some woman was threatening to destroy her family. But then she suddenly changed her story and asked us to leave." Connor made a note in his notebook. Perhaps it was related to his investigation into the thefts. Rich people were often targeted not only by thieves, but also by blackmailers. Meanwhile, Cornelia lay in bed next to Frank in the same hotel penthouse. He was asleep, and she stared at the ceiling, planning her next steps. The meeting with Margaret had gone better than she expected. Now Frank's wife knew she existed, which put additional pressure on her. Cornelia picked up Frank's phone and looked at his missed calls. 17 calls from Margaret in the last 2 days. His wife was clearly panicking. This was exactly what Cornelia needed. Panic makes people make rash decisions, and rash decisions create opportunities. She put the phone back and turned to the sleeping Frank. Tomorrow she would tell him about his wife's visit. She would see how he reacted, and then the next phase of her plan would begin. The morning began with Frank waking up alone in the hotel penthouse. Cornelia had disappeared, leaving only a note. "See you tonight. I have a surprise for you." He found his phone on the nightstand, 23 missed calls from his wife. Frank knew he had to go home and explain himself to Margaret, but the thought of returning to his familiar routine of family life made him feel almost physically sick. During those few days with Cornelia, he had felt alive for the first time in many years. He dialed his wife's number. "Frank? My God, finally!" Margaret's voice trembled with nervous tension. "Where have you been?" "I've been going crazy." "I'm sorry, honey. Urgent business trip. Problems with contractors in Seattle." "What business trip? Your secretary said you weren't going anywhere." Frank cursed silently. He had forgotten to check his cover story with the office. "It was an emergency. I didn't want to worry you." "You didn't want to worry me?" Margaret's voice was becoming increasingly hysterical. "Frank, we need to talk. Right now." "Okay, I'll be home in an hour." The drive to the mansion in the hills took 40 minutes. Frank drove slowly, preparing himself for the conversation with his wife. He knew Margaret well enough to realize that she suspected something. Margaret was waiting for him in the living room, clutching a glass of wine, even though it was only 11 in the morning. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. "Sit down," she said without looking up. Frank sat down in the armchair opposite his wife, maintaining a calm exterior. "Margaret, what's going on? You look terrible." "A woman came to the gallery yesterday," Margaret began, still not looking at her husband. "A beautiful blonde. She called herself Victoria." Frank felt his heart skip a beat, but he tried not to show it. "And?" "She said strange things, that she was looking for a man who was available, not tied down by marriage." Margaret finally looked up at her husband, and Frank saw in her eyes a pain that cut deeper than any accusation. "Frank, who is Cornelia Wright?" The blow was precise and painful. Frank realized that denial was useless. "Where did you hear that name?" "It doesn't matter where. What matters is who she is and what she means to you." Frank stood up and walked over to the window. The gardener was working in the garden, pruning roses. It was an ordinary, peaceful scene that contrasted with the storm raging inside the house. "This is complicated, Margaret." "Complicated?" She laughed, but there was no joy in her laughter. 20 years of marriage, and you tell me it's complicated?" "We both know our marriage died a long time ago," Frank said without turning to his wife. "We live like roommates. When was the last time you looked at me as a man, not as a source of funding for your projects?" "Don't you dare!" Margaret jumped up from the sofa. "Don't you dare turn this around! You're the one who stopped noticing me. You're the one who buried yourself in your work, leaving me alone in this house." "And you buried yourself in the bottle," Frank replied harshly. "You think I didn't notice?" 3 glasses of wine with lunch, 4 with dinner. Sometimes you fell asleep right at the table. Margaret turned pale but didn't back down. "I was depressed. I felt useless, forgotten. And instead of helping me, you found yourself a young whore." "Don't call her that," Frank said, his voice taking on a steely tone. "Oh, you're defending her?" Margaret moved closer to her husband. "So it's serious? Not just another fling on the side?" Frank was silent, and that silence told Margaret more than any words could have. "You're in love with her," she whispered. "My God, you're really in love with that woman." "With this woman who sees me as a person, not a bank account," Frank finished. "Yes, I'm in love. And you know what? I don't regret it." Margaret stepped back as if he had hit her. 20 years, Frank. 20 years I've been your wife. I bore your children. I put up with your binges, your endless business trips. And now you tell me you've fallen in love with a prostitute? She's not a prostitute. Then who is she? A businesswoman? A philanthropist? Don't make me laugh, Frank. I know what girls like that are. They prey on men like you. Cornelia is different. Cornelia. Margaret said the name with disgust. Even her name is fake. She called herself Victoria when she came to the gallery. Frank turned to his wife. What did you say? Your precious Cornelia came to my gallery, under a different name. She studied me like a predator studies its prey. Frank frowned. Cornelia hadn't told him about her visit to Margaret. Why had she done that? Are you beginning to understand? Margaret continued. She's playing with you, Frank. It's all an act, a carefully planned operation. And you, like an old fool, took the bait. Enough. No, not enough. Margaret grabbed her husband by the sleeve. I'm going to fight for our family, for our children. That girl won't get a penny of our money. Frank pulled his arm free and headed for the door. Where are you going? To her. I have to find out everything. If you leave now, don't come back. Frank stopped at the door. Margaret, don't you dare. She threw her glass at him. The glass shattered against the door frame, red wine dripping down the white wall. Don't you dare say you're sorry. If you're sorry, stay. Frank looked at his wife one last time, disheveled, drunk, desperate, and left the house. Cornelia was waiting for him at a new place, a luxurious penthouse in the city center that she had rented for a month. When Frank entered, she greeted him in a silk robe, a glass of champagne in her hand. Darling, you look upset, she said, hugging him. What happened? You were at my wife's house. Cornelia nodded without batting an eyelid. Yes, so what? Why? Curiosity, she said, walking over to the window. I wanted to see the woman who lost such a wonderful man. Cornelia, this is a dangerous game. All of life is a dangerous game, Frank. The only question is whether you're playing or being played. She turned to him and he saw something new in her eyes, cold determination. It's time to make a decision, dear. Your wife knows about us. Soon the children will find out, and all of your high society friends in Glendale. What are you trying to say? I'm saying it's time to make up your mind. Either you're with me or you go back to your alcoholic wife. Frank felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. A week ago, his life had been predictable and boring, but stable. Now he was standing on the edge of a precipice. Cornelia, I can't just abandon my family. You can, she said, walking up to him and placing her hands on his chest. Your children are grown up. They have their own lives. Your wife hasn't loved you for years, but I do. You love me? Of course, she said, kissing him. Can't you see? I've never been with a man as sincere as you. Frank wanted to believe her. More than that, he desperately needed to believe her. Because if Cornelia was lying, it meant he was destroying his life for an illusion. But I need guarantees, she continued. I can't live in uncertainty. If we're going to be together, I want to be sure about the future. What guarantees? Money, a house in my name, a bank account, a place in your company. Frank pulled away. Cornelia. What? Is this a mistress's request? No, Frank. These are the terms of an equal partnership. I'm giving up other men and committing my life to you. In return, I want security. What if I can't give you that? Cornelia shrugged. Then we're not meant to be together. I'll find a man who can. At that moment, Frank realized he was trapped, but he also realized that he no longer wanted to get out of it. Meanwhile, Margaret sat in the empty house with a bottle of wine. She had already drunk half of it and felt the alcohol numbing the pain, but it didn't take it away completely. She picked up the phone and dialed her son's number. Michael? It's Mom. I need to talk to you. Michael Stone, the eldest child in the family, worked as a lawyer at a prestigious firm in New York. He was like his father, tall, determined, ambitious. Mom, what's wrong? You sound strange. Your father is cheating on me with a young girl. There was a long silence on the line. Mom, are you sure? Absolutely. I met her. She's not even hiding her intentions. What are you going to do? Fight. I won't let some slut destroy our family. Mom, maybe we should try to work things out peacefully. Talk to Dad. Your father is in love with her, Michael. He's willing to throw away a 20-year marriage for a girl who's young enough to be his daughter. Margaret heard her son sigh heavily. Do you want me to come over? No, not yet, but if you need me, I'll be in touch, Mom. And remember, no matter what happens, the kids are on your side. After talking to her son, Margaret felt a surge of energy. She wasn't a helpless victim. She had resources, connections, influence, and she would use all of it to protect her family. She opened her laptop and began searching for information about Cornelia Wright. If this girl thinks she can destroy other people's families with impunity, she is sorely mistaken. The next day, Detective Connor received another call about the Stone family. Detective? This is Tyler Mills. We met yesterday at the Moonlight Gallery. I remember. Is something wrong? Cornelia Wright is taking things to a new level. She's demanding money and property from Frank Stone. A lot of money. How do you know that? I have sources. Detective, this woman is dangerous. She'll stop at nothing. Connor jotted the information down in his notebook. The case was getting interesting. That same evening, Frank told Cornelia his decision. I'll buy you a house, and I'll open an account in your name." Cornelia smiled. "What kind of house?" "On the beach, with an ocean view." "And a yacht?" Frank was surprised. "A yacht?" "A successful businessman should have a yacht." "Where will we spend our romantic evenings?" "I have a yacht. It's called Margarita. I named it after my wife." "Then rename it Cornelia." Frank nodded. At that moment, he was ready to give her anything she wanted. "There's one condition," he said. "First, I have to officially divorce Margaret." "Of course, dear. How long will that take?" "In our state, at least 6 months." Cornelia frowned. "That's too long." "There's no other way." "We'll see." Cornelia smiled mysteriously. She already knew what to do next. The plan had matured completely in her mind. All that remained was to wait for the right moment. The party on the yacht Margarita was supposed to be a business event. Frank planned to sign a contract with Japanese investors for the construction of a new shopping complex. The 30-meter yacht bobbed on the waves in the private marina of Glendale, illuminated by hundreds of lights. Margaret appeared on board in an elegant black dress, with impeccable hair and an icy smile. She hadn't spoken a word to her husband in the last 3 days, but she agreed to play the role of the perfect wife in front of the investors. Frank knew this game. In their circle, family dramas were never aired in public. "Mrs. Stone, you look magnificent," bowed Mr. Tanaka, the head of the Japanese delegation. "Thank you." Margaret smiled sweetly, but Frank noticed how tightly she was clutching her champagne glass. There were about 20 people on the yacht: business partners, lawyers, bank representatives. The crew consisted of Captain James Harris, Steward Robert, and 2 waitresses. Everything was going according to plan until Cornelia came on board. She appeared in a red dress that accentuated every curve of her figure. Her hair was styled elegantly, and her smile was as bright as a spotlight. Frank froze. They hadn't agreed that she would be at the party. "Sorry I'm late," Cornelia said, addressing everyone present. "My name is Victoria Lang, and I represent European investors." Frank felt his stomach tighten. Margaret slowly turned to him, and he saw a mixture of anger and despair in her eyes. "Mr. Stone." Cornelia approached Frank and extended her hand for a handshake. "Finally, we meet in person." The performance was brilliant. Those present saw an elegant businesswoman meeting Frank for the first time. Only Margaret knew the truth. The next hour was spent in business discussions. Cornelia demonstrated impressive knowledge of international investment and construction. Frank realized that she had carefully prepared for this performance. "Mr. Tanaka," Cornelia said during dinner, "what do you think about joint projects with European partners?" While the men discussed business, Margaret drank her 4th glass of champagne. The alcohol loosened her tongue and heightened her emotions. "Miss Lang," she said to Cornelia during a break when most of the guests had gone out on deck, "I wonder where exactly in Europe your company is located?" "In Zurich," Cornelia replied without batting an eyelid. "And the name?" "Alpine Investments. We specialize in luxury real estate." Margaret smiled sarcastically. "What an interesting specialization. Luxury real estate." A dangerous note crept into Margaret's voice, which Frank noticed. He knew his wife well enough to understand that she was on the verge of a breakdown. "Honey, shall we take a walk on the deck?" he suggested to his wife. "No, thank you. I want to learn more about Miss Lang's activities." Cornelia felt the tension, but didn't show it. "What exactly would you like to know, Mrs. Stone?" "How young women achieve success in the male-dominated business world. It's so difficult to get ahead without connections and capital. It all depends on what a person is willing to do to achieve their goal," Cornelia replied. "And what are they willing to do?" "Anything." The words sounded like a challenge. Margaret put her glass down on the table so hard that the champagne spilled. "Frank, we need to talk. Alone." "Margaret, now is not the time." "Now is the time." Several guests turned at the sharp tone of the hostess. Frank took his wife by the arm and led her into the cabin. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed as soon as the door closed. "What are you doing?" "I'm protecting my family." Margaret was on the verge of tears. "That girl is making a fool of me. She came here to my house, to my yacht. This is a business meeting. Don't lie to me. She's your mistress, your precious Cornelia. Quiet, they'll hear us. Let them hear, let everyone know what a scoundrel you are. Frank grabbed his wife by the shoulders. Margaret, pull yourself together if you ruin this deal. I don't care about your deals. She pushed him away. I've put up with your cheating and neglect for 20 years, but this is the last straw. What are you going to do? End it. Once and for all. Something frightening appeared in Margaret's eyes. Frank felt a chill of fear. Margaret, get out. Get out and don't you dare come near me. Frank left the cabin, leaving his wife alone. Returning to the guests, he tried to act normal, but his thoughts were confused. Margaret was unpredictable in this state. Cornelia noticed his concern. Mr. Stone, is everything all right? Yes, of course. My wife is just a little tired. At 10:30, most of the guests began to leave. Mr. Tanaka shook Frank's hand. We will consider your offer and give you an answer tomorrow. When only Frank, Margaret, Cornelia, and the crew remained on the yacht, the atmosphere became tense. Margaret came out of the cabin with a new glass of wine and sat down in the chair opposite Cornelia. Well, Miss Lang, can you take off your mask now? Cornelia smiled. What mask, Mrs. Stone? The mask of a respectable businesswoman. We both know who you really are. Frank tried to intervene. Margaret, please. Shut up, his wife snapped. Your whore wants to play guessing games? Let's play. Cornelia's smile faded. Careful what you say, Mrs. Stone. Or what? What will you do? Seduce my husband even more? He's already ready to give you half his fortune. Margaret! Frank was horrified. Or maybe you'll tell all of Glendale about our family problems? But that works both ways, sweetheart. Margaret stood up and moved closer to Cornelia. I know everything about you, Cornelia Wright. I know about your clients, your methods. And if you don't get out of my husband's life, I'll make sure the whole town knows the truth. What truth? Cornelia asked coldly. That you're a common prostitute who preys on rich men. Cornelia slowly stood up. A dangerous gleam appeared in her eyes. A prostitute? Let's talk about who the real parasite is here. You've lived off your husband's money for 20 years, contributing nothing. You drank yourselves into oblivion in your gilded cage. How dare you? I dare to do a lot. Unlike you, I fight for what I want. Margaret raised her hand to strike Cornelia, but Cornelia caught her wrist. Don't, Mrs. Stone. That would be a mistake. Women, stop! Frank intervened, but it was too late. Something broke inside Margaret. 20 years of humiliation, loneliness, and pain burst out. She grabbed the heavy ashtray from the table and swung it at Cornelia. Cornelia tried to dodge it but slipped on the wet deck. The ashtray hit her hard on the temple. The sound was disgusting, like a nut cracking. Cornelia fell, hitting her head on the metal side of the yacht. Blood gushed from the wound, staining the white deck scarlet. Cornelia! Frank rushed to her, but it was too late. Cornelia's eyes were already closed. Margaret stood with the ashtray in her hands, not understanding what had happened. Alcohol and shock paralyzed her mind. What have I done? She whispered. My God, what have I done? The ashtray fell from her hands and rolled across the deck with a clatter. Captain Harris, hearing the screams, ran out of the wheelhouse. Mr. Stone, what happened? Frank was kneeling next to Cornelia's body, his hands covered in blood. Call the police, he said quietly, and an ambulance, although it's too late. Detective James Connor received the call at 11:47 p.m. Murder on a Millionaire's yacht. Cases like this didn't come along often. He arrived at the scene 20 minutes later with the forensic team and the medical examiner. The yacht Margarita was cordoned off with police tape. The body of a young woman in a red dress lay on the deck. A bloody ashtray lay nearby. What do we have? Connor asked Sergeant Riley. The victim is Victoria Lang, 24 years old. At least that's how she identified herself. Death was caused by a blow to the head with a blunt object. Any witnesses? Mr. and Mrs. Stone, plus the yacht's crew. 3 crew members claimed they were in the engine room and didn't see anything. Connor surveyed the crime scene. The picture was fairly clear. Signs of a struggle, blood on the deck, the murder weapon next to the body. Where are the suspects? In the saloon. Margaret Stone is in shock. Frank Stone is demanding a lawyer. Connor went down to the saloon. Margaret was sitting in an armchair wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at one spot. Frank was pacing the cabin, nervously smoking a cigarette. "Mr. Stone, I'm Detective Connor. I need to ask you a few questions. I won't say anything without a lawyer." "That's your right. And you, Mrs. Stone?" Margaret slowly raised her eyes to him. "I killed her," she said quietly. "I killed that girl." "Margaret, shut up!" Frank shouted. "Why shut up? It's all over!" Connor sat down opposite Margaret. "Tell us what happened." "She came to destroy my family. She gave a false name and pretended to be a businesswoman, but I knew who she was." "Who was she?" "A prostitute. My husband's mistress." Connor looked at Frank, who had turned pale. "Mr. Stone, is that true? I want a lawyer." "What's her real name?" Connor asked Margaret. "Cornelia Wright. She worked under the name Victoria." Connor remembered the information he had received from Tyler Mills. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. He spent the next 2 hours interviewing witnesses. Captain Harris confirmed that he had heard shouting and swearing, but had not seen the incident itself. Steward Robert described the tense atmosphere during dinner. "Mrs. Stone was very drunk," he said, "and clearly unhappy about the presence of that blonde woman." "And Mr. Stone?" "He was nervous. He was trying to separate the women." Connor also spoke to several guests who had not yet left. They all confirmed the same thing. Margaret was heavily intoxicated and behaving aggressively toward Miss Lang. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the picture of the crime was clear. But the detective knew that this was only the beginning. He had to find out the true identity of the victim and the motives for the murder. "Arrest Margaret Stone," he told Sergeant Riley. "The charge is second-degree murder." When Margaret was handcuffed, she did not resist. She even seemed relieved. "Detective," Frank called out to Connor, "my wife is ill. She doesn't know what she's doing." "That's for the court to decide, Mr. Stone. For now, I need to know everything about your relationship with the victim." Frank realized that his secret life was no longer a secret. The next morning, Detective Connor sat in his office studying the case file. On the table were photos from the crime scene, witness statements, and the coroner's preliminary report. Cornelia Wright had died from a traumatic brain injury sustained from 2 blows, first with an ashtray, then against the side of the yacht. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." Tyler Mills entered the office, looking exhausted and depressed. "Detective Connor? I heard about what happened on the yacht. Is Cornelia really dead?" "Yes. Did you want to give a statement?" Tyler sat down in the chair opposite the detective's desk. "I knew it would end badly. Cornelia was playing with fire." "Tell me about her, the real Cornelia." Tyler sighed heavily. "When I met her a year and a half ago, she was just a normal girl. Nell worked as a waitress and was in college. Kind, sincere, with plans for the future. What changed? She saw how the rich clients of our club lived. Expensive cars, jewelry, clothes. And she decided that honest work was for suckers." Connor took notes. "When did she start working as an escort?" "About a year ago. At first, she said it was temporary, just to pay for college. But then she got hooked. The money corrupted her." "Did she talk about her clients?" "Sometimes, always with a calculation. Who paid how much, who had what weaknesses. Cornelia studied them like an entomologist studies insects." Tyler paused, gathering his thoughts. "Detective, she wasn't a regular prostitute. Cornelia was a predator. She hunted rich, lonely men with the goal of marrying them or getting large sums of money." "Frank Stone wasn't the first?" "God, no. There were at least 3 before him. One businessman from Seattle gave her $100,000 and a house in the suburbs. Another bought her a car and a yacht." Connor looked up from his notebook. "A yacht?" "A small one, but expensive. Cornelia sold it a month later." "What happened to these men?" "I have no idea. Cornelia never said how her relationships ended. She just disappeared from their lives with their money and gifts." After Tyler left, Connor contacted his colleagues in Seattle. 2 hours later, he received some interesting information. Businessman Robert King had committed suicide 8 months earlier, leaving a note saying that he had lost everything because of a young woman named Victoria. Connor sensed that the case was taking on a new dimension. Meanwhile, Margaret Stone sat in her prison cell. Sobering up, she realized the horror of what she had done. She had killed a person. a young woman who could have lived her life, despite her flaws. Her lawyer arrived, David Richmond, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. "Margaret, I'll be representing you. Frank hired me." "How is he?" "Shocked, trying to deal with the aftermath. The press has already gotten wind of the scandal." Margaret covered her face with her hands. "Do the children know?" "Michael is flying in from New York. Sarah is coming from college tomorrow." "How am I going to explain this to them? How am I going to explain that their mother is a murderer?" Richmond sat down next to her. "Margaret, tell me everything from the beginning, every detail. If we want to get leniency, I need the whole picture." For the next hour, Margaret recounted her marriage, her husband's infidelity, and how Cornelia had methodically destroyed her family. "She came to my gallery under a false name," Margaret said. "She studied me like a doctor studying a disease before treatment. She wanted to know my weaknesses. And what happened on the yacht? She mocked me. She hinted at her relationship with Frank in front of the guests. She called me a parasite." Margaret began to cry. "I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted her to leave us alone." Richmond nodded. The story was tragic, but he had a defense plan. At that time, Connor was questioning Frank Stone in the presence of his lawyer. "Mr. Stone, how long was your relationship with the victim?" "About a month." "Did you know about her past?" Frank paused. "I knew she was an escort, but I thought things would be different with me." "Did she demand money from you?" "Yes, a house, a bank account, a share in the business." "How much did you give her?" $50,000 in cash. I didn't have any more time," Frank's lawyer interrupted. "My client was the victim of manipulation. This woman was a professional at deceiving men." Connor showed Frank a photo from the file. "Do you recognize this man?" The photo showed a middle-aged man with a noose around his neck. "Number, who is he?" "Robert King, a businessman from Seattle. He committed suicide after a relationship with your Cornelia. She drove him to bankruptcy." Frank turned pale. "I didn't know." "She did it professionally, Mr. Stone. She studied her victims, gained their trust, drained them of money, and then disappeared." Connor opened a folder with documents. "We have information on 3 more cases. Cornelia Wright was a serial con artist. Your wife may have saved you from financial ruin." The next day, the story hit the press. "Murder on a millionaire's yacht. Wife kills husband's mistress. High society scandal." The headlines splashed across newspapers and the internet. Connor received a call from the county sheriff. "James, this case is going federal. The FBI is interested in Cornelia Wright's activities. It looks like she worked in several states." "What did they find?" "Fake documents, fake bank accounts, ties to organized crime. This girl wasn't just an escort." The information drastically changed the case. Cornelia was part of a larger scheme to defraud wealthy men. A week later, the preliminary hearing took place. Richmond presented a defense strategy based on emotional distress and self-defense. "Your Honor, my client was the victim of cold-blooded manipulation. Cornelia Wright systematically destroyed the Stone family, threatening Margaret Stone's financial well-being and mental health." The prosecutor objected. "Your Honor, regardless of the nature of the victim, the defendant committed premeditated murder. Margaret Stone delivered a fatal blow in a state of rage." The judge heard both sides. Considering the circumstances of the case and the defendant's lack of prior convictions, as well as new information about the victim's criminal activity, the court is willing to consider a plea bargain. Richmond and the prosecutor negotiated. In the end, Margaret agreed to plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a reduced sentence. A month later, the court handed down its sentence: 5 years probation with mandatory treatment for alcohol addiction and 2 years of community service. After the sentence was announced, Margaret met her husband in the courtroom hallway. "I'm sorry, Frank." "You're the one who should be sorry. This is all my fault." They embraced for the first time in many months. "What will happen to us?" Margaret asked. "I don't know. We need time to figure things out." Detective Connor closed the case 2 months after the murder. In his final report, he wrote, "Cornelia Wright was a professional con artist who used intimate relationships to defraud wealthy men. Her activities led to the suicide of at least one person and the financial ruin of several families. The murder committed by Margaret Stone, while a crime, was the result of systematic psychological pressure and threats to destroy a family. Tyler Mills left Glendale a month after the trial. Before leaving, he left flowers on Cornelia's grave. "I'm sorry, Nell," he whispered. "You could have been a good person." Frank and Margaret began family therapy. Their marriage was hanging by a thread, but both understood that they had to try to fix things for the sake of their children and the memory of what they once had. The house Frank wanted to buy for Cornelia remained unsold. Sometimes he drove by and thought about how one woman could destroy so many lives with her boundless greed. The incident on the Margarita yacht served as a warning to many wealthy families in Glendale. The town, accustomed to peace and prosperity, realized that evil could come in the most tempting packaging. Detective Connor continued his work, knowing that human greed and despair would always find new ways to clash in a deadly battle. The story of Cornelia Wright was over, but somewhere in the city, new tragedies were brewing, born of the same vices: greed, betrayal, and the thirst for easy money. In the end, the price of greed always turns out to be higher than it seems at first, and it is paid not only by those who crave wealth, but also by those who stand in the way of it.